proposing a $1 billion plan to help the Palestinian enclave of Gaza. It's already being called a Marshall Plan for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Meantime, in Yemen, desperately needed aid is trickling in, but the humanitarian crisis is still dire.
And in Washington, President Trump has approved the public release of a controversial memo blasting federal law enforcement officials for alleged surveillance abuse.
From the I-24 News Studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with David Schuster and Shayna Estulin.
And welcome, everybody. Tal Heinrich is in for Shayna. Always great to have you here.
Great to be here.
Just 3 years after Israeli forces invaded Gaza in a war with the Palestinian terror group Hamas, Israeli officials are now proposing a massive aid effort in Gaza.
Israel presented its grand plan at the emergency meeting in Brussels, also marking the first time the United States and the Palestinians have gathered since President Trump's controversial move to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I-24 News anchor and correspondent Elon Levy has the exclusive report.
$1 billion. That's what Israel told the international community it will cost to save the Gaza Strip from humanitarian collapse. Israel presented the list of projects to major donor countries to the Palestinian Authority in Brussels, and now I-24 News can exclusively reveal its details. The document reveals a new desalination plant in the Gaza Strip will cost $710 million, with $250 million still needed. That's designed to relieve severe water shortages in Gaza, where most of the groundwater is contaminated with sewage and seawater. But that money needs to come from international donors. They're also asked to pay for water reclamation, sewage treatment, and even squeezing water from humidity in the air. As for Gaza's protracted energy crisis, the document highlights ambitious international plans that need cash. Israel has approved connecting the Gaza Strip to natural gas from Israeli gas fields. That's meant to meet Gaza's energy needs and dramatically reduce costs for the Palestinian Authority. But for now, that project needs $80 million. And until then, Israel wants to connect Gaza to a new power line, almost doubling its electricity supply to the Palestinian enclave. That needs $36 million from donors, and over $30 million are needed to meet Gaza's growing power demands through solar energy. Also revealed, Israel is looking into expanding the Erez pedestrian crossing with the Gaza Strip to accommodate the transfer of goods. Today, goods can only go through the Kerem Shalom crossing, but saving Gaza's economy means expanding its capacity to sell to the outside world. Norway and the European Union called the emergency meeting of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee in Brussels to encourage talks towards a two-state solution. But for Israel, the humanitarian crisis is attracting more immediate attention. This week, the UN Special Envoy warned Gaza is on the brink of total collapse.
We're on the verge of a total systems failure in Gaza, with the full collapse of the economy, the social services, political, humanitarian and security implications stemming from that.
But Israel's regional cooperation minister told diplomats the plans can only go ahead if the Palestinian Authority takes back full civil control of Gaza from Islamist terror group Hamas. Those reconciliation talks are stuck, leaving those urgent humanitarian plans needing scarce money and even scarcer political will. Elon Levy, I-24 News.
Let's bring in J.J. Goldberg, editor-at-large at The Forward. And J.J., what's the reaction to Israel's proposal and why they're doing it now?
I think it's important. I think that it's a recognition that they've got a next-door neighbor that's on the verge of a crisis, and they don't want to have a crisis on that border. They want Israel's blockade is not directed against the people. It's directed against Hamas control. And so they've been walking a very difficult tightrope between attacking the government while not hurting the people. The people at this point are the larger problem.
It sounds like a very ambitious plan to rehabilitate and stabilize Gaza, but Israel says it needs two things to happen in order to follow through with this plan. One is a lot of money, as we heard in Elon's report, and the second is that the Palestinian Authority will actually take control of the Gaza Strip. How do you see this playing out? Is it actually going to happen? Can it happen?
Well, the donors issue, the money issue, is a little bit of a surprise because when it says Israel has a plan and you call it a Marshall Plan, you sort of assume that Israel's going to do it.
Right.
And what they're offering is to allow that to happen and to send in some experts. So it's a big step, but it's not nearly what I think the world community had hoped for. The second issue is the PA, the Palestinian Authority, taking over. The talks are stuck over details. Now, they're big details. Hamas doesn't really want to give up its guns. And the Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, is insisting on that. There's also pressure from the Palestinian Authority on Hamas to accept Israel, to stop declaring an intention of destroying Israel, because that's basic to relations between the Palestinian Authority and Israel. It's a big jump, but it's got to be taken. And Hamas has been tiptoeing toward it.
And if the EU really wants to help with that effort to try to get the Palestinian Authority to get more control, wouldn't the best thing they could do is to actually line up the donors and say, okay, here's where all the $1 billion would come from if, in fact, the Palestinians and Hamas are able to settle their differences?
Well, part of the problem with that is that the difficulties of the population in Gaza are putting pressure on Hamas. So if you ease the pressure, then it makes it easier for Hamas to stand up to the Palestinian Authority. Remember, the cuts in electricity over the last year were not because Israel wanted to reduce the electricity, but because Ramallah, because the Palestinian Authority was cutting its payment. It was covering the cost of the electricity. When it decided to cut the cost, the supply went down.
So it's quite a miracle that the situation in Gaza is not worse, even worse than what it is right now, as we know, with people not having electricity for many hours throughout the day. But I think it's also a miracle in the other respect, because so much money has been pouring into Gaza over the years. And the European Union, you know, they just announced a $52 million assistance package. Where is the money going to?
Well, the European Union assistance package is going to East Jerusalem and the West Bank.
Yes.
So that's a different issue. It comes up at the same time as the Gaza package, and so it sounds like it's related.
To the Palestinians in general, but...
Right, but it's not. It's to the West Bank. It's to the Palestinian Authority. The larger issue is that Israel has been allowing supplies and necessities into Gaza at a level that it believed would maintain a minimum for years. And so it's not that much of a miracle that Gaza has survived, because Israel has made sure that things don't get completely intolerable.
What should we be looking for in terms of the Palestinian reaction? I mean, so far it seems fairly muted, but how do you see this playing out?
Well, a lot of it depends on the individual details. It certainly helps the PA, the Palestinian Authority, in its efforts to take over Gaza from Hamas. It puts Hamas in a bind because it really wants to help its people. It doesn't want to be as unpopular as it's become, but it doesn't want to give up its war on Israel.
And briefly, just what do you make of the fact that the Americans and the Palestinians were there for the first time meeting in Brussels?
Well, on both sides, there's a lot of puffing going on. So that when Trump says, we recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, it's not as sweeping as the Palestinians make it. And when the Palestinians say, we want the United States to have nothing to do with the peace process, that's not as sweeping as it's people have been saying for years that the Oslo agreement is dead, and yet it is basically fully functional. All of the offices, all of the relationships are still maintained.
J.J. Goldberg, we're going to have you stick around just for a few moments, and we're going to switch topics, though. In Poland, lawmakers in that country's Senate have now approved a bill to restrict certain descriptions of the Holocaust.
If the measure is signed by the president of Poland, it would then be legal to blame or accuse the nation of being complicit in the illegal, to blame or say that the nation is accused of the World War II era atrocities. The proposed law is controversial, of course, to say the least, and I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Mike Wagenheim reports on that.
Israel thought it had a friend in the right-wing Polish government, but Israeli leaders have their limits, even in Europe, where friends are hard to find. Legislation that passed the Polish Senate on Wednesday would criminalize implicating Poland in being complicit with the Holocaust. And Holocaust revisionism is something Israel is not willing to put up with.
I see with gravity the Holocaust law legalized by the Poles. I see it as an attempt to deny their responsibility to everything that has happened to Jews in Poland during the Holocaust. This morning, I requested the Prime Minister to immediately order, as a Prime Minister and a Foreign Minister, the return of the Israeli ambassador to Poland for consultations.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's closest rival for the premiership had most of his family wiped out in the Holocaust and has questioned Netanyahu's wisdom in befriending countries like Poland, where anti-Semitism still rears its head. Some believe Poland's overtures toward Israel are a cover for legislation like this.
No bill can rewrite history. Poles were accomplices to the Holocaust. Poles snitched on Jews, Poles participated in the Nazi killing machine. And trying to write a bill now that says otherwise is just an example to the fact that anti-Semitism today lives and burns within modern Poland. And we're going to object to it in any way possible.
While there were tens of thousands of Poles who risked their own lives to save Jews from the Nazi death machine, there is indisputable evidence that many Poles helped Germany carry out its final solution.
We're talking about 250,000 of Polish Jews who tried to flee the Nazis. They fled camps, ghettos, trains, and they tried to find shelter within the Polish society. The problem is that most of them didn't meet the righteous among the nations. And current research shows us that many of those Jews were killed, not because of the Germans. Sometimes they were handed to the Germans, but by Polish citizens, by Poles who found them.
Over half of Israel's parliament has responded by co-sponsoring legislation making Poland's bill an illegal form of Holocaust denial. And it seems a relationship that Netanyahu worked so hard to build is crumbling. Mike Wagenheim, I-24 News.
Back now with J.J. Goldberg, editor-at-large at The Forward. J.J., is this an effort by the Polish government or members of the Polish Senate to whitewash history?
I think it's mainly an effort to defend Poland's honor. It's the sort of talk that we're hearing in Israel, in the United States. The trend toward nationalism is leading people to want to outlaw speech that makes the country look bad, or in Washington's case, that makes the president look bad. The fact is that when people talk about the Polish death camps, what they mean is death camps that were in Poland. But many Poles hear that as an accusation that they owned the death camps. Now, the Polish government was in exile at the time. There were many Poles who handed the Jews over, some out of fear, some out of anti-Semitism. The best solution to all of these problems is to allow free speech. And this is the sort of thing that is going on in too many places. And by the way, Israel has outlawed advocacy of boycotts of the West Bank settlements by saying it's illegal to advocate a boycott of Israel or territories under its control. So that nobody's coming to this with clean hands. And the Poles are not denying the Holocaust. They're denying the non-existent accusation that they were somehow responsible for.
I'm just wondering, how do you even enforce this law now that if it exists, if the president signs it into law, how can the Poles actually enforce it?
I think they mainly want to have it on the books.
Right?
It's one of those things that you don't particularly enforce. Every now and then you find somebody to drag into court. But mainly it's an assertion by the parliament of its pride in being Polish and of the grand state. We see that, again, all over the world.
What do you think should be Israel's response, though, besides diplomacy?
Diplomacy is about, since this is about talk, the best response is talk. Israel should make its displeasure clear, which it's done. I think the relationship with Poland is an important one. The fact that there is anti-Semitism in Poland is not news. There was a crisis in 1989 when Prime Minister Shamir said in an interview that the Poles drink anti-Semitism in their mother's milk. There was a huge crisis about it. Poland and Israel were about to form diplomatic relations. That was delayed for a year by him shooting off his mouth. So that the talk always gets overheated. The realities get ignored. And there's one more thing here. One of the trends in the growing strength of the right is this insistence on speaking truth. Now, not every truth needs to be stated. When the United States recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, even though the rest of the world wants to leave that for negotiations, the reply was, well, it's the truth. It's the obvious truth. Yes, it is. But you don't need to say everything that's true, just like on campus, where people want to say things about minorities, about sexual minorities, because it's the truth. They feel it's the truth. You don't need to speak everything as truth. We should have learned that over Thanksgiving dinner.
Even the U.S. Holocaust Memorial has said that it is appropriate, rather they said it is inappropriate to describe them as Polish death camps. They should be referred to as Nazi death camps in Poland. So there are concessions that some of the historical groups that are the relevant actors here have recognized.
Well, it's an obvious truth. They were not Polish in the sense of being owned by Poland. They were Polish in the sense of being in Poland. How much are you going to police the way people hear what you said?
Right. J.J. Goldberg, editor-at-large of The Forward. J.J., thanks for coming in and talking with us on both topics. We appreciate it. Still ahead on Crossroads, food aid has begun to trickle into Yemen, a country suffering from the world's worst humanitarian crisis, but there's still a shocking lack of access to basic health care.
Plus, more than 6,000 Syrians will now be allowed to stay in the United States for an extra 18 months, protected from their nation's bloody civil war. Details coming up.
I'm Khaled bin David.
And I'm Nareet Ben.
Join us on The Rundown here in the heart of the Middle East for a candid conversation.
A closer look at the stories born out of this region and driving changes all the way to Washington.
I'm Jeff Smith on I-24 News. Brace yourself for your daily dose of news with top stories, sports, politics, and pop culture.
Weekday mornings at 7:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
In Yemen, where the ongoing war has already killed more than 10,000 people, desperately needed aid has begun to arrive. A Saudi military plane delivered food shipments just outside of the country's capital, Sana'a, with around 90,000 tons more aid expected to be delivered over the next few days across the region, including to areas controlled by Iran-backed Houthi rebels.
But Yemen's dire humanitarian crisis continues, with more than 8 million people now solely dependent on aid and hundreds of thousands of children suffering from severe malnutrition. And the situation is even worse for disabled children who are living in displaced camps. The war continues to hamper access to basic health care. To discuss all this, we're joined by international journalist Tara Kingarlu. And Tara, with the aid starting to trickle in, I suppose that's a good thing, but is that missing the larger story?
In a way it is, David, because let's look at the aid that Saudi Arabia is sending now. Saudi Arabia just a few months ago blocked access into this country. And Yemen is a country of 27 million in population, where more than 90% of its food and healthcare supplies come from the outside. So they're all exported in this country. So even now that this humanitarian aid is trickling in, we are looking at a country that is completely, essentially just non-existent, whether it's its economy, healthcare, or food supply.
Yes, we keep repeating here the sentence, the world's worst humanitarian crisis. So what does it actually mean on the ground? Where do you see most of the challenges there?
One of the biggest challenges is healthcare, because this is a country, actually Yemen is the poorest country in the Arab world. So its healthcare, education system, food supply has already been dire. And given the circumstance right now, the access to areas that are being affected by this conflict is incredibly low. There is no way for international aid organizations to move around, whether they are there to provide healthcare, food supplies, but also access to the country. So healthcare and clean water and sanitation are some of the biggest issues.
And those are three things that the lack of them contributes to the cholera epidemic that has been running wild.
Absolutely, absolutely. The cholera epidemic has killed 2,000 people so far. And right now, we're not hearing reports of this a lot, but diphtheria, which is a disease that can be prevented by vaccination, predominantly among children. I mean, children get this disease. It's on the rise. So what does that say? That says not only the healthcare industry is broken, but also water and sanitation is incredibly scarce. So out of 27 million Yemenis, 22 million are in need of humanitarian assistance.
Yeah, and we're talking about a civil war that started in 2015. We have to also remind the viewers that it's the third civil war in Yemen in just 4 decades. It's the third one. So there are certain people there, think about the ages, who basically lived through civil wars their entire lives. How do you see this coming to an end? Will it anytime soon? Because the Yemeni government is saying that they are controlling 85% of the territory right now.
Well, I mean, just look at what happened last week. You know, the problems in Aden and the constant airstrikes that are killing mainly children and also destroying hospitals and clinics. I mean, if you compare this to another humanitarian crisis, which is still Syria, and look at where that has gone in the last 7 years, you can easily say clearly this is not going to get fixed. The way I see it, and many people in the region and on the ground see this, is that Yemen may potentially be divided in north and south, but in the interim, what's at stake, as always, are people and children mainly.
And divided between those who support the Saudi Arabian government, which is the Yemen government in exile, technically,
right,
and the Houthi rebels who support Iran. And this proxy war, of course, continues to pay a price for everybody except for the Saudis and the Iranians.
Absolutely, and the first and biggest casualties of every war are the people, and this continues. And there's a major aid fatigue for donor countries, so that's another consideration in helping Yemen.
Interesting insights. International journalist Tara Kangaroo, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And coming up here on Crossroads, the civil war continues to rage on in Syria, but thousands of Syrians will be allowed to continue to seek refuge in the United States, at least for now.
And President Trump is expected to declassify a controversial memo alleging surveillance abuses by the FBI and Justice Department. Details on that ahead.
Esta semana en News 24, Pence en Israel, Jerusalén es la capital del Estado judío. Venezuela, socialismo caótico en una sociedad en crisis. Entrevista exclusiva, Gabriela Michetti, vicepresidenta de Argentina. News 24, el magazine semanal en español de I-24 News.
I-24 News. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Join Lauren Izzo at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
There's more to the news than meets the eye. Many voices, many faces, with interests often at odds. We take you deeper beyond the headlines, inside the drama, the controversy, bringing you fresh insights into the conflict, breakthroughs, heartaches, and victories shaping our world. Perspectives. There's more than just one view. Sunday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
In the United States, the Trump administration has now extended a special protected status for Syrians.
This allows those refugees to stay in the country for at least another 18 months as Syria's bloody civil war continues. Now, for more on that, we're joined by our senior diplomatic correspondent, Nina Larson at the United Nations. Nina, how many people is this affecting, and does it cover all Syrians who have moved to the United States?
Well, yes and no, Tal. About 7,000 Syrian nationals were able to move to the United States in 2012 and onwards. That was when the Obama administration created this special temporary protected status. That wasn't a new law just for Syrians, though. That's something that has been extended to nationals of other countries like El Salvador and Haiti. It's really for countries that are experiencing civil wars, extreme political upheaval, or natural disasters. That's what it's that's what it's aimed for, to give people some sanctuary in the United States for several years sometimes. So there was a big deadline coming up for Syrians fleeing the civil war, and it has been renewed for another 18 months. But this only includes people that have come into the country before August of last year and who have maintained residency. So no one that's coming in recent months can actually apply anymore. But it has given some respite to a lot of people in the country.
Nina, some fresh reminders about just how difficult it is for a lot of people who are trying to get out of Syria because I guess of these accusations now from the Trump administration that the Bashar al-Assad military is developing more chemical weapons.
Yes, there are a couple of very troubling reports, David, on this matter. A report out saying that the Trump administration has intelligence that the Assad regime is, of course, using chemical weapons, and they're getting more and more sophisticated. This puts the spotlight very firmly on Russia again, because as part of a deal in 2013, they were meant to dispose of Syria's chemical weapons stockpile, and clearly that never happened. Also reports that the Syrian government are linked with physical evidence now of the use of sarin, that nerve agent, lethal nerve agent, in eastern Ghouta and in that notorious attack on the village of Khan Sheikhoun about a year ago. And again, Russia at the United Nations here has always been resisting any investigations or conclusions into the use of chemical weapons. They always use the excuse, well, where's the physical evidence? But it's appeared now, David.
Nina, to a different story now, back in the news. In Myanmar, there are reports of mass Rohingya graves. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, the Associated Press in Bangladesh, Chal, are reporting that they have eyewitness statements and time-stamped cell phone videos from those Rohingya refugees that are fleeing Rakhine province. Documentation now of mass atrocities again, and the UN's top official there calling it genocide. One interesting point, we actually had a press conference from the Kuwaitis here. They're taking over the rotating presidency at the United Nations for the month. They were trying to arrange a Security Council visit to Myanmar. It isn't going to happen this month, but it will happen in March or April, they tell us.
Nina Larson, our senior diplomatic correspondent. Nina, thank you very much. And Tal, you and I were talking about, among all the other problems there with Myanmar, 2 Reuters journalists remain in jail, falsely accused, according to Reuters, of somehow being spies.
And now they are rejected bail. This is the latest on this case. And so they're basically, the trial is right now still ongoing. But yeah, 2 Reuters journalists that were covering the atrocities taking place there.
Yeah, such a clear example. Here they are doing their job, trying to report on these things like the Rohingyas that are fleeing and the ethnic cleansing that the world has already leveled against Myanmar. And for doing their job, for trying to report out the story as accurately as possible, there they are. They're paraded in front of the cameras. They're handcuffed. They're thrown in jail. And as you point out, they've just been denied bail.
Basically, the police there were saying that they were found with in possession of certain documents that are, you know, confidential documents, but they were saying that the entire information that was in this document was public, so there was nothing new about it. And well,
some of those documents.
In Hebrew we say there's a saying, "Go prove that you don't have a sister."
Yeah.
So I don't know how it translates, but yeah.
It's a good one. Still ahead on I-24 News, President Trump is expected to approve the release of a controversial congressional memo. Democrats and the FBI are incensed.
And Rabbi Shmuley Boteach has been all fired up, slamming Professor Alan Dershowitz for his alleged defense of Qatar. Rabbi Boteach will join us here in studio. That's next.
Americans have simply lost trust in news media.
What happened to the news? All I get is a daily serving of lies.
Do your job and just tell me the news.
I am overloaded with news that is useless.
Give me the facts. Let me sort it.
Where's the integrity?
Why is the news so biased? I will never trust the media.
Mais même, il faut qu'on fasse la chose qui est dedans. La radio, elle est dedans.
Welcome back to Crossroads. I'm Tal Heinrich in for Shayna Stulin. It looks like the showdown between President Trump and the FBI is about to reach a boiling point amid reports that President Trump has already approved the release of a controversial memo alleging surveillance abuses by the FBI.
Democrats are calling the memo a cover-up campaign and a partisan plot to cast doubt on the Russia investigation. Correspondent Tara Palmieri has the story.
The memo was written by Republican staffers on the House Intel Committee. It apparently argues that the FBI abused its authority when it obtained a warrant to tap the phones of a campaign aide to Donald Trump.
For anybody to be able to spy on American citizens, you should have a very, very high bar to be able to satisfy before you do that.
In a rare statement, the FBI wrote that they have, quote, grave concerns about making the memo public. In a break with the House GOP, the third-ranking Republican in the Senate asked that the Senate Intel Committee read it first, before the president tells Congress to release it.
What this memo is Congress doing its job in conducting legitimate oversight.
On Tuesday, President Trump seemed eager to get the memo out.
Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Don't worry. 100%.
Democratic leaders have asked House Speaker Paul Ryan to intervene and stop its release. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is now demanding that the House Intel Chairman Devin Nunes be removed from the committee. Ranking Democratic member Adam Schiff accused Nunes of changing the memo after the Intel Committee voted on its release.
The memo is seriously misleading because it omits very material information and has deep factual inaccuracies. And what the White House is considering is not precisely what we voted out, and it just goes to show you the problems when you are doing this for partisan reasons.
And that was Tara Palmieri reporting. For more on that, let's bring in our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv. Dan, it's like you said last night, if there's a battle between President Trump and his FBI director, it's obvious who's going to win. Has that come more into focus now?
Well, I'll credit your partner, David Schuster, with that, by the way. A very true observation, because it's always true that the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, cannot fire the President of the United States. But the other way around, it is conceivable. Keep in mind that President Trump fired the FBI Director, James Comey, last May. That's why Christopher Wray has this job. Now, might he resign? There's an expectation that he won't. He's made his position clear. He wants to restore the prestige, the confidence, the reputation of the FBI, so quitting, that won't help. So we expect Wray to stay. On the other hand, we do expect Trump will approve the release of this memo right over the objections of the FBI director. Tal and David.
So, Dan, the release date looks like it's going to be Friday?
Yeah, I mean, tomorrow as I speak, and it looks that way, but it's not absolutely certain. The White House still says that government lawyers are going through what's in the memo. If there's something there that's classified, they would demand that it be removed or redacted, kind of blacked out. That might make it even more interesting to see, you know, right? Intelligence documents with a blackout. But keep in mind, this is not, in fact, an intel document. It's a 4-page memo written by House Republicans. The Democrats say they have a counter memo, but the House Republican majority won't let the Democrats publish theirs. Also, keep in mind, there's another possibility. What if the memo isn't all that persuasive and convincing to everybody? The White House, the Republicans might say, let's release it during the weekend, not to mention Super Bowl weekend. That way the memo might get a little less attention and maybe a little less disappointment if it turns out to be hype. David and Tal.
Interesting analysis there. And then, speaking of Congress, you have news about a push for more sanctions against Iran?
Yes, the focus among some House members now is on something, well, that's chronic and frustrating, what they call hostages held by Iran.
Among all the reasons American politicians give for proposing additional sanctions, the fact that Iran is holding 5 U.S. citizens and 2 green card holders on what the United States government considers weak or false charges. Some members of Congress call them hostages, reminiscent of the more than 50 U.S. diplomats who were prisoners in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran for nearly 15 months, a crisis that ended with their release in January 1981. The Americans now held include 4 dual citizens of the United States and Iran, such as Karan Vafadari, sentenced to 27 years in prison. He and his Iranian wife had an art gallery in Tehran. Their alleged crimes include contact with foreign diplomats. Also, Shi Yue Wang, born in China, a U.S. citizen who's a graduate student at Princeton. He was arrested in Iran while doing research, charged with spying for the CIA. Last summer, he got a 10-year prison sentence. The most mysterious case is that of Robert Levinson, a retired FBI agent. He also worked for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. 11 years ago, as a private investigator looking into cigarette smuggling in the Middle East, Levinson disappeared while on an island in Iran. Iran's authorities offer cooperation but claim they know nothing.
I believe that the government knows where he is, that they've always known where he is. I don't know what it's going to take to get him home, but whatever it takes, the United States government and the Iranian government need to figure it out and get the job done.
That's Christine Levinson of Coral Springs, Florida, noting that after 3 years of no information, somebody, the kidnappers, the Iranian government, sent the family a video of her husband in captivity, but no explanation or ransom demand.
I believe he's alive, and I'll never change my opinion till I hear for sure and have some proof that he has passed away.
President George W. Bush tried to help. So did Barack Obama and his Secretary of State, John Kerry, who tried to have a friendly relationship with Iran. Was that better for the Levinsons than the current total hostility to Iran by the Trump administration?
He's an American citizen, and on that basis alone, he should come home.
Mrs. Levinson visited Congress this week, a guest at the State of the Union address, invited by her member of Congress, Democrat Ted Deutsch.
So I'm not suggesting that the president should offer something. I just want to be sure that they're exploring every possibility. When an American is held hostage, it should matter to all Americans.
Deutsch is a co-sponsor of the Iran Human Rights and Hostage-Taking Accountability Act that would ban any financial transactions and any travel by officials in Iran believed to be involved in improperly imprisoning Americans.
You may know that sanctions against Russia, overwhelmingly approved by the House and the Senate, have not yet been put into action by the Trump administration. But the president is known to be very interested in ratcheting up pressure on Iran. Tal and David?
Our senior Washington correspondent, Dan Raviv. Dan, thank you very much. And ratcheting up that pressure on Iran by focusing on the Americans who are being held hostage is a very, very intriguing separate issue, of course, from the nuclear deal.
I saw this quote here, David, from 2015 from Trump, well, then not the president, but he said, if I win the presidency, I guarantee you that those 4 prisoners are back in our country before I ever take office. How is he going to, you know, make good on his promise?
Yeah, but maybe maybe by drawing more attention to this and being somewhat unpredictable in this particular case, maybe it helps him with Iran, because Iran isn't quite sure what to make of him and what may be coming next.
David, your prediction, a big Friday is waiting for us tomorrow?
I think as far as the memo, there is a memo coming out, but here's the problem that Donald Trump has with this, and that is there's this theory that he's going to use this memo, which will blast Rod Rosenstein. He will use it to fire Rod Rosenstein, put somebody else in his place who could then possibly fire Robert Mueller. We heard the Speaker of the House on this day say, no, the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein's fine, no matter what this memo says, and so is the special counsel. So at least you have the Speaker of the House saying to the President, hold on a second.
We will hold on until tomorrow. Well, still to come here on Crossroads, famed Rabbi Shmuley Boteach slammed lawyer and Professor Alan Dershowitz for his views on Qatar, and Dershowitz fought back. Now Rabbi Boteach is joining us in studio.
Plus, Iranian women have taken to the street, publicly protesting the law that forces them to wear hijabs, the religious Islamic headscarf. Details coming up.
Israel, the Middle East, the world. Get your daily dose every morning on I-24 News. News from around the world to around the corner. Jeff Smith brings you the top stories, the hard news, and analysis you need to know. Weekday mornings at 7:05 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Stories. Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Join Lauren Izzo at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Go beyond the headlines every day on I-24 News. Host Ami Kaufman talks to the news makers and pundits to bring you the story behind the headlines. The Spin Room with Ami Kaufman, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
Nakuna chini ya red number plates. Utafurahi. Wamesota cheki jengo wanda. Now I have like 10. Where there's like the blue stuff.
Renowned attorney and Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz and Rabbi Shmuley Boteach are both known as ardent public defenders of Israel, and neither of them are afraid to court controversy in doing so.
But recently, Rabbi Boteach went after Dershowitz, slamming him for a piece he wrote praising some aspects of the Gulf state of Qatar after he visited the region. Let's take a look at what he had to say about it on our show, The Rundown.
Are you kidding me? Israel has genocidal enemies that seek the annihilation of a people who already had one Holocaust. The hatred for Israel is based on 2,000 years of anti-Semitism. You're comparing that to Qatar, that has a regional dispute with Saudi Arabia and has the world's largest gas fields, etc. Is someone threatening Qatar with annihilation? Does Qatar have a Hamas on its border with a genocidal charter?
Well, Professor Dershowitz then made an appearance on Rundown on I-24 News where he responded to Rabbi Boteach's comments. Watch.
Well, I'm not going to engage with Rabbi Boteach. He's not an expert about Qatar. He just likes to get attention by attacking people like me. He has basically suggested that I've done this for the money. I mean, I spend 50% of my professional time doing pro bono work on behalf of Israel. He gets paid for every minute he spends. Is he really suggesting that my views would be different if I hadn't been sent on a, quote, a junket? So I'm not going to engage him, but I will take on the issue because it's a very, very serious issue. I did not defend Qatar. I'm not the mouthpiece for Qatar. I'm not representing Qatar. I've simply asked for an objective investigation of the conflicting claims. I want to learn the truth.
We're joined now in studio by Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, founder and executive director of the World Values Network. Rabbi Boteach, good to have you here. Is there anything wrong, and put aside Alan Dershowitz for a sec, is there anything wrong with an American going to Qatar and speaking or delivering a lecture or participating in a program there?
I guess it comes down to the question of whether there's anything wrong with legitimizing a state sponsor of terrorism, specifically Hamas, which is on Israel's border, which has killed scores of Israelis, killed scores of soldiers, and Hamas is their biggest funder.
Let me ask you a different way. I worked for Al Jazeera America for 3 years. It was owned by the government of Qatar. Was I therefore somehow complicit in some of the people in Qatar who may have been funding Hamas or other terror organizations?
Did you come back and write a piece for The Hill where you said that Qatar is like Israel and that Qatar, did you defend Qatar? Did you get up and become a mouthpiece for Qatar? No, you probably weren't asked to do that. But what is true about Al Jazeera is that their editorial line on Israel is shocking. And Alan Dershowitz seems to even, I don't know if he's going to defend Al Jazeera necessarily, but let's at least accept that Al Jazeera is their editorial content. It's controlled by the
nobody ever asked us at Al Jazeera in America to take any particular editorial line on Israel. I guess the larger
But that's not why, how could you compare your working for Al Jazeera to Alan Dershowitz accepting an expense-paid junket by the Emir, offered by a PR company, Nick Muslin Stonington Strategies, who were hired at a fortune in order to improve the image of Qatar without Qatar changing its behavior. There's 3 issues we have with Qatar. Number one, they support Hamas, a terrorist organization dedicated to Israel's annihilation. Number two, they grant sanctuary to Hamas's leader, Khalid Mashal, Ismail Haniyeh, who were in Doha living in luxury while Alan Dershowitz was there. Number three, Al Jazeera's editorial line on Israel borders on incitement. Now, that doesn't mean I have an issue with you being there, and I've been a guest on Al Jazeera, but I've been allowed to speak my mind. When Alan Dershowitz came back and shilled for Qatar in the Hill, going so far as to compare Qatar's predicament to Israel, that will live in the annals of infamy of pro-Israel dialogue, because Qatar funds terrorism. Israel is a righteous democracy that promotes human rights.
Why is Qatar so interested in bringing into their country American Jews right now?
Because they want to lift the pressure on them for supporting the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. They want to lift the pressure through a PR campaign rather than changing their behavior. You know, Ron Persaud wrote this article in the New York Times, and he called Qatar the clubhead for terrorists. And all he said was, if Qatar wants this to change, stop funding Hamas. Why is Alan Dershowitz protecting them? Let him get up and say, I will not meet with Qatar until they stop funding terrorists.
It's not the government policy of Qatar. It's not the government or even the emir that is funding terrorists. There are members of the Qatari regime who are doing it.
No, that's not true.
Not official government policy.
No, that's absolutely inaccurate. Here is a speech by the Emir of Qatar. He gave it in the UN September 2014. He falsely accuses Israel of war crimes. He says, to the Palestinians, those who killed your children in Gaza should not be received in diplomatic forums. He called for a boycott of Israel. He falsely accused Israel of war crimes. This is the Emir himself. It is not true that the Emir is not involved in these efforts. The Emir pledged $1.4 billion. It's Qatari money, and it goes to Hamas. And we know Alan Dershowitz himself published a book called Terror Tunnels. It's all about how Hamas uses its international aid, especially from its chief funder, Qatar, to build tunnels where they sneak in and they kill Israelis.
I have a different question. Personally to you, let's say you get a personal invitation by the Qatari authorities to go there and have this very discussion over there. Would you do that?
Oh, I have gotten the invitation. I turned it down. The shocking thing, there must be like a full moon outside, because what's shocking is to see all these pro-Israel leaders that have gone to Qatar on the Emir's dime. Listen, if Alan Dershowitz wants to really find out what's happening in Qatar, he could have paid for the trip himself. He could have gotten many foundations to pay for the trip. The moment you accept a very expensive trip from the Emir of Qatar, Alan Dershowitz is a world-famous jurist. No one is going to accept his testimony, because they're going to say, even if he doesn't mean it, and I don't think Alan Dershowitz can be bought, they're going to say it's still tainted. Anyone would say that.
That's just the point. If you just said Alan Dershowitz cannot be bought, wouldn't it be better then for the Emir of Qatar, the Qatari government, to be spending their money on Alan Dershowitz, treating him to a nice time, if that's what they want to do? Alan Dershowitz is going to come back and say what he truly believes, not because he can be bought, because you just said he can't.
What does he believe?
Maybe he believes that Qatar could be a potential ally of Israel.
But let's look at saying that a person cannot be bought and saying he's dead wrong and he's become the mouthpiece of a government or different things. He might believe that. He's still completely wrong. Alan Dershowitz said that what he's doing is he hinted that it had the blessing of the state of Israel. Israel yesterday put out this statement in their embassy in Washington, D.C. It's clear. This is from Haaretz. Israeli embassy in U.S. We oppose Qatar's outreach to pro-Israel U.S. And you know why they did this? They did this because they were sick of hearing of people, amateur diplomats like Alan Dershowitz, deciding to play the role of Israel. Israel knows what it's doing. If Israel wants to engage Qatar, they have plenty of ambassadors to do it. They don't need a bunch of rabbis.
And they do engage Qatar. They do it quietly, because if you go to, for example, an agricultural show in the Middle East, there are Israeli products and oranges, and the people who are lining up to buy them are from Qatar. There are all kinds of contacts that are going on between Qataris and Israelis. It's just there's not an official diplomatic recognition or relationship.
We have no issue with Qatari people at all, in the same way we have no issue with the Iranian people. We have issue with their governments. Qatar is very close to Iran. We have issue with the Qatari government that supports Hamas, that is dedicated to a genocide of the Jewish people. And we have an issue with Iran that regularly threatens the Jewish people with annihilation.
And you think that Dershowitz was speaking on behalf of the Qatari government and not the Qatari people?
Oh, I'm not. There's no debate as to what he did. He came back. You said things are done quietly. He came back and wrote a fawning piece about Qatar in The Hill, a mainstream political publication, where he compared Qatar to Israel. Honestly, you have to understand what this means. Qatar is a monarchy that regularly abuses human rights. Qatar is a terrorist funder. You're comparing it to Israel, and you're a pro-Israel mouthpiece? What could have caused him to say that? And all I'm asking him to do is to do one of two things: either repudiate it and apologize for it, or debate me. He has repeatedly refuses to debate me.
I think you two should have this debate in Qatar. That would be.
I think we should have it right here. I want to repeat my challenge to him to debate me. He can engage in all the personal insults he wants, as you just saw. He can
on New Jersey.
But I'm not the Jersey thing. But I don't have to go to Harvard Law School to learn right from wrong. And defending a terrorist funding entity, especially one that funds Hamas, which kills Jews and Israelis, is wrong, period.
Well, let's be very clear. Alan Dershowitz, if you're out there and you see this segment, you are welcome anytime. We will make the connection happen between you and Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. We will not put any time limits. We will just moderate a nice debate, and we'll do it in front of the cameras on the studio.
And because Jersey offends him so much, we'll make sure it's not in Jersey.
Okay. Rabbi Shmuley Boteach, good to have you on. Thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. Coming up, Iranian women have been removing their headscarves in public places in defiance against wearing hijabs. Those details next.
Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all. Join Lauren Izzo at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Women in Iran are climbing on utility boxes, benches, and cars, ripping off their headscarves and waving them on sticks. It's their way of protesting the forced wearing of hijabs, religious Islamic headscarves.
Their actions are a symbol of the freedom they believe they do not have. Some of the protesters, by the way, have been arrested. I-24 News international affairs correspondent Bianca Zanini has the story.
Something is happening in Iran. Women are climbing utility boxes or benches in the middle of traffic and taking off their headscarves, waving it calmly on a stick as a symbol of the freedom they don't have. They stay there no more than a few minutes, just enough time for people to take pictures, to film it, and put it on social media. But even those short minutes can be dangerous. Iranian women can be arrested for not following the strict Islamic law to cover their hair.
What's happening right now is because of social media and satellite TV, internet, and all the communication technology that's all around us, women, even in rural areas, are learning new things, newer things, and they're learning about their own rights.
The women are joining the movement #Girls of Revolution Street. It started in the very end of December when this photo of 31-year-old Vida Mohamed went viral. She became the face of the massive anti-regime protests that swept the country in the end of the year, where more than 1,000 were arrested and at least 20 people killed. Vida Mohamed was also arrested, sparking the viral campaign, "Where is she?" According to a human rights lawyer, she was freed late last week.
What women are doing right now in Iran is, although you could just say it's for hijab, but no, it's for so many things, but it's going to be through opposing mandatory hijab. They have been harassed, they have been assaulted, they have been under pressure. This movement, if you will, you can possibly call it a sort of a Me Too movement as well for Iranian women.
While women in the US, Europe, and in Israel are uniting around the Me Too campaign and saying time's up, women in Iran are very literally stepping up, even when it's difficult, to silently, defiantly, and bravely call out, "We have the right to decide." Bianca Zanini, I-24 News.
So interesting.
It is bravery, we can say. You know, sometimes when you see all these pictures of Iran before the revolution online, I am always amazed by such a huge difference.
They were great friends of the United States. President Jimmy Carter went and visited the Shah. He went to Iran. They used to be great friends.
Yeah, but it's not like the people of Iran were satisfied under the Shah's regime. We should remember that.
Speaking of great friends of the United States, so you may not know this, but I am half Canadian, and I was astounded to learn that the government of Canada, they have now approved a change. They've now made a change in their national anthem. So it goes something like this. Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all thy sons command. They took out the sons, and now it's in all of us command.
So it's a gender neutrality
thing. It doesn't
thing.
even make it. That's not even really
How
English.
do you feel as half Canadian? I would like to ask you, how do you feel about it?
I feel like it's just political correctness. I mean, people.
It's too much.
It's
It
too
is
much.
political
I mean,
correctness,
does this mean that the United States should now change our national anthem and not talk about the bombs bursting in air because that's violence, and we should now have the flares lighting up the air? I mean,
maybe one day, not under this administration, I would say, but maybe one day it will get to that. And speaking of anthems, I can tell you that many minorities, minority groups in Israel, they feel that they cannot identify with the Israeli national anthem because it has this line there that says, Nefesh Yehudi Omiyah. It means a Jewish soul still yearns. So, well.
What about people who are not Jewish?
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, I think that's a bigger issue than politically correctness.
Are you a fan of volcanoes?
Of course.
All right, so let's roll the video from the Philippines. This is Mount Mayon, and what's so spectacular about this volcano is that they've now gotten some night video of this thing exploding. It is lighting up the night sky. This thing has been going off now for about, I don't know, about a week or so, and there are great fears that at any moment this thing is going to have the big one, the big explosion, and it's going to spew lava everywhere. All over the nearby farming villages, so they've evacuated tens of thousands of people. But in the meantime, as they speed up the nighttime video, it's pretty impressive to see the lava coming out.
It's beautiful to watch it from here, from the U.S., and not be around it. Yeah.
It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
Have you ever been close to lava?
No.
No.
No,
Hawaii
I don't
or
think
anything
so.
like that?
No, I'm trying to think. No, I don't think so. But they're saying it's a 2.2 miles, the lava spread there.
Yeah,
well,
crazy.
yeah, that's quite a lot. Well, we have more on Clear Cut later on.
That's right, you're sitting in
right?
for Clear Cut. So Tal's going to take us home there, and then I'll see you on Stateside with the latest on the Trump-Russia investigation and how this FBI memo may, well, it may cause some monkey wrenches. I-24 News continues off after this.